What if I told you that Singapore's career could be the time when Ferrari touch back? What has Fred Vasseur seen in the SF-25 that has it so worried? Today, I reveal the real reasons why the Ferrari chief is losing the dream, and what that could mean for the entire F1. Fred Vasseur to the limit. A figure that, since his arrival in Ferrari, had been a symbol of stability and order in the middle of chaos that characterized the Scuderia for previous years. A technical profile, pragmatic, which does not usually resort to great statements or shows overwhelmed emotions in public. But now, at this exact moment of the 2025 season, Vasseur's face tells a completely different story. It is not a simple passing concern. It is a face of someone who has detected a deep, chronic, structural problem, and that begins to understand that there could be no solution in the short term. What happens within Ferrari is not just a crisis of results. It is a technical identity crisis. The SF-25, far from representing a step forward with respect to its predecessor, has fallen into a kind of gray zone where virtues are scarce and weaknesses are completely exposed. The car is not only the only one among the leading teams that has not won a race so far, he is also the only one who seems not to understand how to extract performance from the current regulation. The trigger was disqualification in the China Grand Prix, a sanction for irregularities in the wear of the soil and the minimum weight of the car. A technical detail, yes, but with devastating consequences. Because that penalty forced Ferrari to make a drastic decision, increase the march height of the SF-25. And in the era of the soil effect, that decision is practically synonymous with giving up aerodynamic efficiency. With that change, Ferrari lost one of the few weapons that still had to compete. Since then, the car became even more unpredictable. The operational window narrowed at ridiculous levels. A car that depends millimetrically on how the flat background behaves in combination with the rear suspension. A single millimeter more march height can be equivalent to losing 2 or 3 positions on the grille. And that is not a metaphor. It is pure physical. It is compromised aerodynamics. It is extreme sensitivity to the environment. Something that no engineer wants to face in a championship where every detail counts. And here the greatest headache for Vasseur enters the scene, the architecture of the rear suspension. A critical area that, from the pre-season, has shown symptoms of structural weakness. Insufficient stiffness, bad absorption of dynamic rebound, severe limitations to control the behavior of the combined braking car. All that added prevents SF-25 from behaving with track coherence, and is not simple setup settings. We talk about a design failure that directly compromises the technical concept of the car. This has forced Ferrari to improvise, to apply solutions in the middle of the season that should actually have been implemented during the winter development phase. Patches, not real progress. And when operating under that improvisation level, control of the global plan is lost. It is exactly what we are seeing. The technical team is constantly in reactive mode, not proactive. And that generates an invisible but real erosion within the working group. But not only is concern technique, it is also moral. Because when a pilot like Lewis Hamilton, who arrived in the hope of leading a new golden cycle in Maranello, begins to question the adaptation of the car to his handling style, and Charles Leclerc, on the other hand, openly recognizes that they cannot fight even in favorable circuits, the message in the garage is of distrust. Nobody knows with certainty how to make the SF-25 give well 2 weekends in a row. And that, in Formula One, is a recipe for disaster. Fred Vasseur is at a time where he must decide whether he persists with this concept or accelerates the abandonment of the current project to focus completely in 2026. But that decision has huge implications. Because if they surrender too soon, they could lose 2025 completely. And if they cling to a car that clearly does not work, they will also compromise their competitiveness when the new regulation enters into force. This is the most critical situation for Ferrari since the collapse of 2020. And the most serious thing is that, unlike then, they now do not have Red Bull at its peak. Now it is McLaren who has taken the lead with aggressive development, it is Mercedes who is again competitive, and it is Ferrari who seems more lost than ever. Vasseur knows it, and for that, before arriving in Singapore, his concern is not tactical, is existential. Singapore, the most demanding stage of the calendar. A tropical night, a bumpy track, temperatures to the limit, and a city that does not forgive mistakes. For Ferrari, this circuit should not be a threat. In theory, it was even one of his best opportunities. But in Formula One, the theory rarely survives contact with reality. And at this point in the 2025 season, which seemed like a redemption window, can become a deadly trap for SF-25. Charles Leclerc was one of the first to anticipate it. Before the championship began, he had marked Singapore with a circle in his calendar. He considered one of the 4 paths where Ferrari had a real opportunity for Victoria. Together with Monza, Baku, and Las Vegas, they were the great awards where the characteristics of the circuit aligned with the strengths of the car. But recent results have made it clear that expectations are not being met. In Monza, the performance was frustrating. In Baku, simply non-existent. And now all the chips are on Singapore. The problem is that the SF-25 seems less prepared than ever. Marina Bay's layout is reputed to favor cars with good traction, low-speed aerodynamic load, and a chassis capable of supporting constant aggressive braking maneuvers with immediate changes of direction. In other words, you need a balanced car with confidence to the limit and with a wide operating window to adapt to the changing conditions of the urban asphalt. Exactly the opposite of what Ferrari offers at this time. One of the great challenges in this circuit is the management of mechanical grip in closed curves. The SF-25, with its little rigid rear suspension and its inability to maintain a stable march height, particularly suffers in that type of sectors. Throughout the season, it has been shown that when the car faces slow curves with braking weight transfers, aerodynamic load collapses. And in Singapore, each curve is such a trap. Thermal management is also a key aspect. In Marina Bay, temperatures can exceed 50 degrees on the track, which requires a perfect cooling of the hybrid system, especially battery and MGUK. Here also Ferrari arrives badly prepared. Throughout the year, the SF-25 has shown a worrying trend to overheating in traffic conditions. Something critical in a circuit to advance is difficult, clean air is scarce, and DRS offers minimal benefits. A bad classification on Saturday could condemn the entire race on Sunday. Vasseur knows it, and that is another of the reasons why he is so worried. But perhaps the most alarming aspect is the impossibility of replicating configurations. The SF-25 has proven to be inconsistent between sessions. What works on Friday in race simulation disappears on Saturday in classification. And what is useful for the fast return destroys the tires in stint long. That duality becomes lethal on a path like Singapore, where there is no room for strategic errors and where each boxes must be perfectly coordinated with the track events, including virtual safety cars and potential red flags. Internally, Ferrari has already made several simulations with extreme configurations. From aerodynamic packages with maximum load to hybrid solutions in the energy recovery system. But none of that can compensate for a structural defect. And if the car cannot generate confidence in curve entrance, the pilot, no matter how talented, it will not risk. Because in Singapore, the wall is always too close. The expectation in Maranello was clear, using Singapore as a project for relaunching of the project. A weekend without errors, a classification in the first row, a clean race, and a podium. But now, that seems more a fantasy than a realistic projection. Everything indicates that the team will be obliged to run on the defensive. And that is not only worrying, it is unacceptable for a team like Ferrari. One that invests millions, which has 2 elite pilots, and who reached 2025 with the promise of fighting for championships. If Ferrari fails in Singapore, it will not simply be another bad weekend. It will be the public confirmation that the SF-25 is not up to par. And more importantly, it will be the signal for Vasseur that it is time to cut for the healthy. To declare the dead concept and focus all the resources in the 2026 car. But doing so before October implies giving up the entire second half of the season, assuming that there will be no victories, that there will be no redemption, and that the pilots will have to manage the frustration career after career. That's why Singapore is not just a race. It is a sentence. And in Ferrari, everyone knows that this could be the breakdown. And now, it is time for you to ask yourself a question that not many are willing to ask themselves out loud. What if Ferrari no longer knows how to win? Not due to lack of resources, not due to lack of talent, but because after so many years of broken cycles, erratic decisions, and huge media pressure, the Scuderia has lost the technical clarity that once made it unstoppable. What we have seen so far is not simply a badly born car. It is a reflection of a structure that has not yet solved its traumas of the past. That he has not yet learned to think in the long term without being dragged by the urgency of the immediate results. And Singapore, far from being a salvation table, can be the most cruel mirror. He who shows Ferrari everything that has not changed, despite having tried everything, That is why the figure of Fred Vasseur acquires an almost tragic weight, because he is caught between hope and reality, between what he promised to assume the position and what the car is able to offer, between two elite pilots that demand results and a technical basis that does not respond. And if in Singapore Ferrari again fails, the message will be clear. Is not bad luck. Is not a punctual mistake. Is time to pause, accept failure, and start over from scratch. So now I leave you with a reflection. Is it brave trying to fix a broken project or having the courage to discard it completely? Leave me your opinion in the comments.